The MLB playoffs are a time of the year that many spend months looking forward to, whether it's in anticipation for your favorite team to make a deep run or just enjoying the most important game of the year. For some, it's World Series or bust, while others are just happy to be involved. Regardless, the playoffs are exciting, but they're also a time of stress. I think whether your team is a division winner or a wildcard sneak that's just happy to make it this far, you still want to win it all. And every game is stressful because every team in the playoffs has a chance. Even if aspirations were not defined as the World Series back in April, you're here now. Playoffs in sports are unique in the fact that they don't disregard the regular season, but we go from league-style play with standings and team records, and then just transfer that into tournament-style play with brackets and eliminations. If baseball really wanted an accurate description of the league's best team, it would be like a soccer league like the Premier League or Bundesliga. It would essentially result in the best performing team of the regular season being the champion. Simple as that. Also, both leagues would have to combine. Due to the playoffs, we often see the best team not actually win it all. So when we really break it down and look at it from a completely outside perspective, that doesn't make any sense, if the point was to determine the best team. But it's not. We're here for exciting playoff storylines, huge upsets, stress-inducing games, and the highest of high stakes. And also money. Playoffs make MLB a lot of money. But let me circle back here. The point of this video is to analyze what is the best team in baseball. How often do they actually win the World Series? Is there a burden that comes along with being the best? It's one thing to be consistently good across a 6-month of regular season, but all it takes is just a few games to end your entire year. So with the playoffs already well underway in Major League Baseball, let's discuss how often the best team actually wins the World Series, and the varying scenarios that have played out over time. What teams have lived up to their regular season hype, and which ones were too gassed to make an impact when it really mattered? Before we get into the data and some team examples, what constitutes as the best team in baseball? I've been insinuating that the best team and the World Series winner are not synonymous with one another. You may disagree. You might believe that what happens before the World Series doesn't matter. The team that showed up and won it all is the league's best team. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to brag about my team winning their division if they choked in the playoffs. I probably won't even talk about it again after that season. But I think there is a difference between the two. I'm going to refer to the best team as the team with the best record in baseball that year. Of course, that's still not really a perfect solution because there could be just a couple games between the best team and the second best team, as well as the fact that teams have different schedules based on divisions and leagues. But any other way of looking at it would require a lot more variance and opinions, so I think it's fair to refer to the best team as the one who came out with the best winning percentage that year. Now that we've figured that out, let's take a trip to the past and see some of the best teams in baseball and their journey to try and prove they're the best. I spent a decent amount of time earlier detailing the significance of the postseason, but for a good 66 years, there really wasn't one. From 1903 to 1968, it was just the World Series, which is still the postseason, but nowhere close to what we have today. It was one series between the two best records of each league, and that answers my question pretty easily. At least for that era. It's the team with the best record in the AL versus the team with the best record in the NL. Obviously, there's a huge chance for the best team to win the World Series. There were no divisions or interleague play either, so it was the perfect way to determine who was truly the best team after the World Series concluded. By the way, since there's so much variance in these different eras, I'm going to talk about them separately because I think it'll be more interesting to see how each one varies from one another. So although you could easily argue that whoever won the World Series in this time was the overall best team, for the sake of the video, let's just see how often the best team with the better record came out on top. Now, the best record just needs to win the World Series and no other postseason games, but they're also facing the second best record, meaning that the skill gap is going to be quite close. And by the way, all situations where I saw teams with the same exact record, I just had them both considered as the best team. So here are the results. From 1903 to 1968, the best team by winning percentage won the World Series 37 out of 65 times. That comes out to around 57% of the time that the best team was able to come away with a World Series victory. So it's pretty split, and you could probably guess that it also favors the side of the slightly better record. I'm not going to go super in-depth into some of these matchups, but I want to talk about a few notable ones before we move on. The first thing I'm going to look at is the biggest upset. The biggest upset out of all of these was also the World Series with the biggest difference in record between the two teams. The 1906 World Series resulted in a 4-2 win by the 93 and 58 Chicago White Sox over the 116 and 36 Chicago Cubs. This is also very likely to be the biggest upset we'll see across each era, as the 1906 Cubs still stand today as having the best record in MLB history. Only one other team has gone 116 wins, and that was the 2001 Mariners. But the Cubs played 10 fewer games, leaving them with easily the best winning percentage in history with 763. So this is already a pretty famous World Series, as it produced one of the most shocking upsets in sports, and as time went on, you could argue it still is the biggest one. To make matters worse for the Cubs at the time, that 1906 White Sox team was often cited as the hitless wonders because they had the worst batting average in the American League. If you're wondering how this team translates in the modern day, their OPS ranked last in the AL and their slugging also ranked last in the AL. This is 1906 we're talking about. The offensive performance of this era was incredibly bad. This entire White Sox team had 7 home runs, so even in a time of low offensive production, the White Sox were seen as the worst of them all. The funniest part is, the White Sox didn't even hit well in the series either. They hit 198 through the whole thing. The Cubs just managed to hit even worse. The White Sox only scored 6 runs in the first 4 games. By the time the series was split 2-2, the White Sox randomly came to life and scored 8 runs in Game 5 and 8 runs in Game 6. What also helped the White Sox in this World Series was their pitching. Not only were they one of the highest ranked pitching staffs of that season, but they were lights out in the World Series too. As the Baseball Almanac puts it, the Sox had pulled off an upset of gigantic proportions. Now let's see who is the best of the best. Which World Series winner in this era had the best record of them all? Well, that honor goes to one of baseball's most famous teams, the 1927 New York Yankees. With a 110-44 record and a 714 winning percentage, this team swept the 94-60 Pittsburgh Pirates with relative ease, and it's easy to see why. This team featured the famous Murderers Row, headlined by Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. They led the AL in pretty much every offensive statistical category you can think of, and that's just the offense. I haven't even touched on the fact that Murderers Row commonly overshadows the fact that their pitching staff ranked first in ERA and featured 2 future Hall of Famers in Wade Hoyt and Herb Pennock. It's a team of history, and not much more needs to be said that most people don't already know. Now we have reached the era of the Championship Series, a time where the world was introduced to a whole extra round of the playoffs. This era was also our first introduction to divisions, with each league being split into an East and a West. This meant that each division winner moved on to the playoffs, increasing our possible World Series winners from 2 to 4. It's a small jump in what will become a series of jumps over time. This era lasted from 1969 to 1993. So we've already crept up pretty close to the modern day, at least in the grand scheme of the sport. So let's do the same thing we did before, and I'll leave a reminder of the last result each time. How often did the best team in the league win the World Series? The only thing to mention for this one is there was a strike in 1981, resulting in that season having a division series way before it was actually implemented permanently. But there's just one instance of this happening, so I'll just leave it in. The best team won the World Series from 1969 to 1993, 7 out of 25 times. That results in 28% of the time that the team with the best record wins it all. That's a pretty significant drop off from the 57% of the first era, but it's unsurprising given the fact that the playing field doubled. But if you were to assume that each team had the same chance to win, that would be 25%, which is not much lower than the 28% that we came out with. But once again, now that we have the result, let's highlight some teams before we move on. We're gonna do it a little differently for this one though. Instead of the biggest upset in the World Series, what's the biggest upset overall? Why overall? Because now there's more at stake than just losing the World Series to an inferior team. You could be out by the championship series. There were a few good candidates for this, such as the 1974 Dodgers losing the World Series 4-1 to an Oakland A's team with 12 fewer wins than them, although that Oakland team was a dynasty. Or the 1990 Oakland A's who got swept by the Reds who also had 12 fewer wins than them. And even worse than those is the 1987 Tigers who lost the ALCS 4-1 to a team with 13 fewer wins than them. But I feel like there's no worse situation than being the best team in baseball and not even making the playoffs. That honor goes to the 1981 Cincinnati Reds. I already mentioned how the 1981 season was an abnormal year, but let's dive a little deeper into it. Why did they need a division series? The 1981 season was one of many in MLB history that got impacted by a players' strike, but this strike took place in the middle of the season. It started on June 12th and lasted well over a month, not being resolved until July 31st. Once that was solved, there was a delayed All-Star game taking place on August 9th, and then the season would resume on August 10th. Thereby, MLB just lost about 2 months worth of baseball. As a compromise, the league granted each team with the best record in their division before the lockout a trip to the playoffs, and a second half of the season would be played to determine the rest of the playing field. It all sounds like a decent compromise to make up for killing that first half momentum for many teams, but this created a ton of problems. Essentially, a few teams that did well but not well enough to win their division in half a season got screwed, but none were screwed more than the Reds. The Reds lost their division in the first half by half a game because they played one less game than the Dodgers, something completely out of their control. This is because the season ended so abruptly. Then, in the second half, the Dodgers completely checked out, while the Astros had a huge surge to first place despite having a below 500 record in the first half. This led to Cincinnati placing second once again, this time by a game and a half. Not only were the Reds punished for things out of their control, but when you add all the records up from both halves, the Reds came out as the best team in baseball, yet they didn't even make the playoffs. And the team that played an extra game than them in the first half due to sheer chance went on to win it all. The Cardinals ran into a similar issue, but they were not the best team in baseball like the Reds were. A terrible fate almost completely out of their control. They were the best team and they didn't even have an opportunity. As for the next team that I want to talk about, how about instead of the best winner, we find the year with the worst winner? The team with the worst record to win the World Series in this era was the 1987 Minnesota Twins. This team only had 85 wins and a .525 winning percentage. To make matters even more interesting, this Twins team had a negative 20 run differential. Now, run differential isn't perfect or anything, but it's at least somewhat indicative of how a team should perform. So it's pretty interesting to see a team that gave up more runs than they scored make the World Series and win it all. Not to mention, there were 3 other teams in the AL with a better record than the Twins that didn't get to make the playoffs. So they squeaked in due to a weak division and made the most of it. They beat the best team in baseball in the ALCS, the Detroit Tigers, who had a 98-64 record. 13 games separated Minnesota and Detroit, and yet the Tigers got beat in just 5 games. If it weren't for what happened to the Reds, this could easily be that era's worst outcome for the best team in baseball. Then the Twins had a very hard-fought series against the 95-win St. Louis Cardinals, winning it all in 7 games. Another team with a significantly better record. Something interesting to note is that both teams won all of their home games in this series. And back then, home field advantage alternated between AL and NL each year. Did it help them to edge out that win? Who knows? On paper it seems so, since both teams won all their home games, but we don't know what would have happened if St. Louis had those 4 games instead. It is interesting though that the Twins had a road record of 29-52 in the regular season, which is one of the worst I've ever seen from a playoff team. But all in all, 8 teams in baseball had a better record than this Twins team, and yet on the biggest stage, they beat the best team in baseball and the best team in the National League. They are easily one of the greatest underdog stories in MLB history, and a direct part in causing the best team of 1987 to go home quite early. As time moves on and we go along with it, MLB continues to expand the playoffs even further. By 1994, Major League Baseball had another realignment, leading us to the 3 divisions per league that we're familiar with today. This consists of an East, Central, and West division. This means that with a 3rd division winner and now a wildcard candidate to even out the odd number, we have doubled our playing field once again from 4 teams to 8. This time period lasted from 1994 to 2011, with the 94 season having no playoffs due to a player strike, so our sample is around the same size as the last one. Yet again, I naturally expect the results of the best team winning to become even less likely now with 8 possible winners. By the way, there was one season in 2007 where the Red Sox and then Indians had the best record, but I just decided to give the benefit of the doubt and say the Red Sox were the best team and the World Series winner. Overall though, from 1995 to 2011, the best team in baseball won the World Series 3 out of 17 times. We've now moved down to around 18% of the time that the best team in baseball wins the World Series. We're in pretty recent territory now, so many of the playoffs may be familiar to you all. You might be able to guess what team we're going to talk about, and that's the 2001 Seattle Mariners. We talked about them a bit earlier, about how they're one of 2 teams to have 116 wins in MLB history, but they were easily the biggest upset in this era, not only failing to win the World Series, but they also didn't even make the World Series. Mariners lost the ALCS to the Yankees 4-1. That series had 2 blowouts, one by each team, and then every other game was decided by 2 runs or less. In low-score games, facing the greatest reliever in MLB history certainly doesn't help, and nothing supports them more than championship win probability added, which literally means the impact a player had individually on swinging the World Series odds in their favor or out of their favor. And in this series, only one player gave their team an overall better chance than Mariano. However, the Yankees hit better in the series, and that helped too. I don't think I really need to elaborate about this more. It's a very unfortunate season, and it's constantly talked about because of the Mariners' eventual slide over the next 2 decades. But it needs to be mentioned because it leaves the 2 best records in baseball history, the 1906 Cubs and the 2001 Mariners, failing to win it all. For this era, I'm going to combine all the playoff formats that have been used in the last 13 years. From 2012 to 2019 and also 2021, MLB expanded the playoffs to include a wild card game. This time, instead of one wild card team moving on to face the 1 seed, we have 2 wild card teams playing against each other to decide who faces the 1 seed. This means we've increased our playoff teams from 8 to 10. However, for 1 year only, MLB was forced to do something different in 2020 by creating an expanded playoffs due to COVID-19. In this format, every team played a 3-game wildcard series. Each league had 3 division winners, 3 division runner-ups, and the 2 best remaining records in that league. Since it's just 1 season though, I'll include this 16-team playoff in our result. But then, in 2022, MLB introduced the format we currently use today. Inspired by the COVID wildcard series, they added 1 more team from each league to the playoffs to make the 3-game wildcard series a new permanent round. This leaves us with 12 teams going to the postseason. If we had more years with this format, I would have separated all of these eras from each other, but we only have 2 years to work off for this one and 1 year for the 2021. So let's just look at the results. From 2012 to 2023, the best team in baseball won the World Series 4 out of 12 times. So we actually have a slight improvement here from the last, with the best team winning 33% of the time. So for this, rather than focusing on a single team, let's focus on a common complaint about these playoffs. In the last 2 years, many fans have voiced their concerns that wildcard teams are going on crazy runs far too frequently, and the best teams are getting rusty from a week-long bye. Prior to the 2024 postseason, this was a real concern people had. Was it just cope? Probably, but teams with the bye lost 5 out of the 8 division series in this format. There were massive upsets to some teams that were making regular season history. I already didn't think there was much validity to those claims as we have just a couple of years of information to work with, but I'm re-editing things now that we're very deep into it, and the only team with the bye that lost this year in 2024 was the Phillies. The Dodgers, Yankees, and Guardians all got the bye and all won at least a Series. And now, as I'm recording this and hopefully releasing before it's over, the World Series is between the #1 team in baseball and the #1 team in the American League. Now the narrative is that the richest teams have an unfair advantage, and the next time those big market teams get sent home early, you know for sure people are going to complain that underdogs have too much of an advantage again. It'll probably go back and forth forever, but I still want to compare it to 2020 when the wildcard series originated. The biggest playoffs in MLB history was this 16-team postseason, the only time MLB has had more than half the league make the playoffs. That allowed for a lot of craziness and potential underdog runs to happen, especially because after only 60 games, who knows who the best team would have been after 102 more. But in the end, it resulted in not only the best team in baseball winning the World Series, but the second best team in baseball making the World Series on the other side. At the same time, the Rays were really close to letting the World Series have its first below 500 team, but they pulled through. Regardless, there's nothing of significance here saying the best teams are favored in this playoff format, just like there isn't anything saying the worst teams are favored in our current playoff format. Don't get me wrong, the more the playoffs expand, the more likely upsets are to happen in baseball, but I don't think a bye week is the reason. Although, after this year, I'm not sure anyone is going to complain about the best teams having a disadvantage anymore. In the end, where do we go from here? Does baseball just keep expanding and keep expanding the playoffs with it? Who knows, but signs are clearly pointing to that happening. If we were to combine all these eras, the best team won the World Series 51 out of 119 times. That would be around 43% of the time. Obviously, this is heavily carried by a long period where there was only a World Series and nothing else. And as time moves forward, it's only going to be less likely in any given year that the best team wins the World Series. That's fine though. Most fans love the playoffs, me included, and it makes MLB a ton of money. It allows more fans to be invested down the stretch and into the playoffs rather than 90% of fans checking out in mid-August. It gives us crazy games, an awesome atmosphere, and ultimately just more baseball to watch. Not to mention, I think it balances out better than people think. If MLB wanted a league that truly strived to determine the best team in any given season, we wouldn't have the playoffs. I'd say what we have is well worth it. Thanks for watching.